Hey guys, welcome back to an interesting video on Wild Rift. So today we are back taking a look at patch 4.3C's first look breakdown. So, as I mentioned in my last video on patch 4.3B, the day that the patch release is the day that I'm out from morning to night, so I wouldn't have time to make a video on it. So unfortunately, we're gonna have to take a look at the first look. Now, generally, the first look is really accurate. It's just that they don't provide you the context, and furthermore, some changes are kind of missed out in the first look. But anyways, we'll do the best we can, and we'll jump straight into it. So let's zoom in a little bit into taking a look at what's going on with the champion buffs. Now, it appears that for this patch, there's just a number of buffs and a number of nerfs to champions, and this, of course, makes sense because the big patch 4.4 is going to come out in early October or mid-October if I'm not mistaken. So it's just this is probably going to be the last patch for 4.C, and it's likely going to last quite a long time. Either that or at the end of September there might be 4.3D, but I don't know if we ever had a D patch. Anyways, let's take a look at the champion buffs. So first up we have Tryndamere. So Tryndamere, basically what he is getting is he's getting more healing on his Q. So as you can see here, basically the base amounts of healing is going up by 0.3 per rank, and also his cooldown on his W is going down by 2 seconds. Honestly, I do not think that these two are very major factors as to why Tryndamere isn't strong at the moment. It's not because of his Q healing, it's not because of his W cooldown, so I really don't think this is going to make Tryndamere all that much better, which is of course what they're trying to do here. So Teemo getting a buff. So his passive, which is the poison, is actually getting a damage buff. So two things here. First up, it's level times 3 instead of level times 2. Secondly, it's 9% AP instead of 7.5% AP. This basically means that in late game, Teemo's poison is going to be doing a lot more damage. And as we know, Teemo is generally strong in the early game, so this is going to make his late game better. So this is actually relatively a meaningful buff. Furthermore, your W, which you max last, the cooldown is going from 17 seconds to 17 seconds, scaling down to 14 seconds. So once again, this only affects him in the late game when you max your W last, and this is again going to make his late game better. So his ulti is also getting a damage buff of 25 at all ranks. So overall, Teemo is getting pretty sizable buffs. Should be a lot more annoying to play against in the late game, especially with the poison and the mobility. Now this one is the one I find really interesting. Lee Sin is getting a buff to multiple abilities. Now I think Lee Sin is already very strong, but of course when you face a Lee Sin in ranked, you're either playing against like a Lee Sin Smurf or you're playing against like a first time Lee Sin. It seems that there really isn't an in between. It's always like either you're an amazing Lee Sin or you're a trash Lee Sin. So maybe there are just too many trash Lee Sins tanking his win rate, so he's getting buffs all across the board. So his Q cooldown is going down by 1 second in all ranks. W cooldown is going down by 1 second, scaling down, it used to be 17 seconds at all ranks, now it's scaling down to 16, 15, 14, getting the Teemo treatment basically. His E is getting more damage because it's getting a higher AD ratio, and the cooldown is going from 10 seconds to 8 seconds. And then his ulti is getting a 25 damage buff onto all ranks. Now I think that the cooldown reductions all across the board, they on their own they don't matter too much, but together you're getting a lot more cooldowns a lot more quickly. And I think probably the most important buffs here are to his E and his R damage, because obviously Lee Sin's very early game, so in the late game your damage starts to slowly fall off, and this is going to help you quite a bit. And yeah, overall I think Lee Sin's going to be so much stronger. So next up, Morgana. So Morgana, her W base damage is going up by 2 at all ranks, and this is of course per tick. So when you stand in her W, per tick is going to do this amount of damage to you. So this is, it's overall going to do just more damage. And don't forget, this is 1 tick, so each tick is going to do 2 extra damage. So overall it's not just a 2 damage buff, but it's more like a 10 damage buff or whatnot, depending on how long you stand in it. So your Black Shield cooldown is also going down very significantly. Actually, it's going down by 3 seconds at base rank, and then the cooldown is scaling down 2 seconds, 1 second, and no buff at all. So this, I feel like they used to try to promote Morgana support, but I feel that if you're trying to promote Morgana support, this wouldn't be the kind of buff that you give, because Morgana support will max Q then E then W last, whereas Morgana mid will max W then Q then E last. So this feels like it helps Morgana mid more than support, because having a lower cooldown on your Black Shield makes just building damage Morgana mid just stronger. So I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure about what the goal of this is, because as I said, we don't have the context, but overall this is a pretty sizable buff to Morgana, and probably is going to make her better in both the mid lane and the support position. So Ahri is getting a buff. Basically, the first buff she's getting is her passive. So the healing you get from takedowns is going up by a base of 10 at all ranks. Ranks, of course, being at certain level breakpoints, and the AP ratio is going up by 5%. So especially in the late game, this is going to result in a lot more healing, because the AP ratio, 5% AP ratio healing is a lot more significant than the 10 base healing in the mid to late game. But of course in the early game, 10 base healing is going to be pretty good, and the movement speed you're getting from your W is going up by 5% as well. But overall, I think that these are not too big changes, because they don't really affect her damage itself. It's just her sustain and her movement speed, so not too much change there. So for Samira, she's getting honestly a really huge buff here. I think this is probably the biggest buff, and she has been being buffed a couple of times. I guess she's a little bit too weak. Haven't been playing too much Samira lately, so I don't really know. But her passive movement speed is going from 2.5 to 3.5 per stack, and this is basically the reversion of a nerf they gave Samira a few patches after release, because Samira was way too strong. So this is kind of a reversion of that. Flare base damage is going up by 5, I believe. Again, I believe that they already gave a buff to her Q, like I think 1 or 2 patches ago. And the AD ratio is going up by 10% at all ranks. This is really a lot of buffs. And then her ulti, AD ratio is going up by 5% as well, and the mana consumption is going down very significantly. So overall, Samira is getting a huge buff, and I think this is going to make her really strong, because obviously more AD ratios on her Q and her ult, which is her 2 main points of damage, together with, of course, more utility like more movement speed and such. I think Samira is going to be really strong. So now, that is it for the buffs. Let's go to the next picture and take a look at the nerfs. So the nerfs, not really too surprising as to who is getting nerfed here. First up, we have Vladimir, who has been running rampant all over the Rift. So the nerf that he is getting is his Q healing. So his Q healing is getting hit in terms of level times 12 becoming level times 10, and 0.04 ability power is going to 0.03 ability power. Overall, I think that this healing nerf is not that significant, because if you really think about it, even at like max level, like level 15, when you times 12 and you times 10, the difference is really not that much. And you know, the 0.03% ability power, yeah, it's really not that bad. I don't think this nerf is too bad. The damage on his pool is going down by 1% max health. You don't really use your pool for damage anyways, but of course you can damage people with your pool, but you generally are using it for untarget ability, so I don't think this is gonna affect him too much. But his E is what you use for your main point of damage. It's getting nerfed in terms of the base numbers, as well as 5% of the ability power, as well as 0.5% of the max health. So I think this is where really the worst of the nerfs comes in from Vladimir, because this is going to be more or less one of his main points of damage, his E, and by nerfing, you know, pretty much every ratio together with the base amount, this should make him deal less damage. So overall, I think this is going to be good for, you know, those people who hate Vladimir, because Vladimir has been basically permabanned since his release. So Ornn, I knew this nerf was going to come again, which is the nerf to his tanky stats in his passive, which of course, the Ornn, really tanky in the late game. I think that he gets way too much resistances from his passive in the late game, so I'm not surprised that they're nerfing it from 28 to 22. And furthermore, I think his W damage is way too much, so it's now going down from 5% to 24, down to 5% to 20. So once again, his late game damage is going to get hit. But the damage to minions is also going down, so his wave clear is also going to be worse. But yeah, because the minimum damage is not going down, so overall you're going to do less damage to minions in some situations. But I think that these nerfs are really warranted. I think that Ornn, despite getting so many nerfs, is still really strong. And the worst part is that a lot of people don't think he's that strong anymore, and they've stopped like permabanning him, so he's like in a lot of games, and he is really strong. So Annie is just getting destroyed here. The nerfs to Annie is insane. So first up, her stun duration on her passive, which basically is her stun on any ability, is going down by 0.25 seconds. So we know that stun duration is even of like 0.25, 0.5 affects a lot. So this is a pretty huge nerf already. Then you move on to the rest of the nerfs. Q base damage is going down at later ranks. The shield cooldown is now going down to a flat 14 instead of scaling down to 11, which is what you max last anyway. And then your shield amount is also going down, you know, especially at the later ranks, and the movement speed you get is also going down by like 10% at every rank. And her ulti damage, first cast base damage, is going down by 30 at the third rank and like 10 at the starting rank. And the second cast is getting the same treatment. It's going down by 10 at first rank and 30 at the full rank, and 10% AP ratio going down, and the cast range is going down by 100. Like, what's going on here? Annie's just getting destroyed by nerfs. I honestly don't think Annie is that strong. After playing against the reworked Annie, I don't think she's that strong. I think that she's honestly okay, and the fact that she's getting destroyed in every area means that the win rate stats that Riot has is proving otherwise. So I guess that I was wrong. She's really just that strong, but I just didn't realize it. But probably not anymore. Like, the nerfs are huge. The worst nerf is probably going to be the stun nerf, and then it's gonna be like the cast range on your ulti, because cast range nerfs are always really bad. And then of course it's going to be like your ulti damage, and then your Q damage, and then your E shields and movement speed and cooldowns. I have no idea what's going on here, but Annie might be unplayable after these nerfs. We'll have to see. So Vayne, her attack speed per level is going down by 1%. Basically, this is the reversion of a buff they gave her a few patches ago, where they said that she needed more attack speed and they gave her this buff. So it's basically reverting that buff. Her passive movement speed towards enemy champions is going down by 5 at the first 2 ranks, but it's going down by 10 at the max rank. So I guess she's chasing people down, running people down too much. So I guess they had to take it away. So that's a little bit unfortunate. And finally, the condemn cooldown is actually going up at the lower ranks, but it's going to be the same at max rank, and this really affects Vayne's earlier stages of the game, because condemn is your main safety tool and also your only CC in your kit when you max this last. So you're only going to really max this like I don't know, I think like 15 minutes in the game or something. If not, it's going to be at like low ranks, so it's going to be like a 3-second longer cooldown. So overall, it's going to be worse for Vayne. And Jhin, I believe this is also a reversion of a buff they gave him like many patches ago, where basically his last bullet damage, the one that always crits, from 14% plus 1% times level, is now going to 10% plus level times 1%. So the base amount is going down by 4%. So overall, this is going to lead to a lot less damage, because basically you need to be 4 levels up on what you were previously to do the same amount of damage. I think this is a pretty sizable nerf to Jhin. However, this is only on his 4th shot, so his normal shots, his Q, everything else still kind of remains the same. It's really just the 4th shot, which you could argue is Jin's biggest and main point of damage, so that kind of hurts. And furthermore, his W is also getting a damage nerf in terms of 10% AD ratio, as well as 20 base, roughly 20 base, 10 base at the first rank. But yeah, so overall Jhin catching a couple of nerfs does make sense. He is pretty strong. I didn't know if Vayne really need the nerfs, so I don't think Vayne is that strong. But anyways, yeah, so he's gonna be put down a peg, especially in the earlier stages of the game. This is gonna in late game, as you guys can see, this maxes out at level 11, whereas this has to be at level 15. So overall, his on max level, his damage is gonna be the same, but for the rest of the game, his damage is gonna go down quite significantly. But anyways, with all that out the way, all that said, that's it for the breakdown, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and goodbye.